Here are 6 players that you need to stash on your Dynasty rosters right now.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Magdziuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay tuned for the Nissan Armada Player of the Week later in the show. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Magdziuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. And on today's show, we're going to talk about the Cowboys acquiring Joe Milton. No, we're not. I mean, could I do a full 30-minute show on Bazooka Joe? Of course, but that's not what we're going to do. Instead, we're going to talk about 6 players that you need to be stashing at the bottom of your Dynasty rosters right now. Earlier this week, we talked about some players that you can go ahead and cut, trade, that aren't doing anything for you. They're going to open up roster spots for these 6 players. And Kate, let's start with some second-year running backs, because you want to gamble on upside. And running back is one of the spots where we pretty routinely get guys that come out of nowhere to be top 12, top 15 running backs. So who are you gambling on this offseason?
Right now, I'm looking at gambling on a very fine prospect from the 2024 draft class. And I do think there is some upside to be had, even though didn't get to see it in year one. I'm talking about Arizona Cardinals running back Trey Benson, who I've had some mixed feelings about, especially given the fact that since we covered him in the pre-draft process, we actually saw that, James Conner got a contract extension. He played super well, but looking at his player profile coming out in the pre-draft process, 2022 to 2023 advanced percentiles per PFF, 96th percentile PFF rushing grade, 100th percentile missed force tackles per attempt, 91st percentile yards after contact per attempt. He's a decent enough receiver, very reliable with the ball in his hands, doesn't fumble. And I do think in general, when I'm looking at players that I think could have a big second year leap, Trey Benson is a guy that I think is on a good enough team with a good enough quarterback in a good enough situation that should have opportunity to prove himself heading into year 2.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a struggle for Benson. If you remember in the preseason, there were a lot of concerns about maybe his vision. He started the year out very, very rough. Didn't get a ton of work, only 64 total carries in the season. But as the season kind of wore on, I thought he looked better and more comfortable. What I like about Benson, he's only 22. He'll turn 23 this summer. He had a massive knee injury in college that he's just further removed from now. So I think that'll obviously help. And it's not like James Conner is a spring chicken here. Like James Conner was in the 2017 draft. He was a little bit of an older prospect coming out anyways. I think Benson, he's the clear RB2 in Arizona on a team that I think wants to be pretty balanced. Yep. Yeah, why not? Plus, he's incredibly cheap right now, Kate. You can get Trey Benson for basically a song. RB35 doesn't have to be a good song. 109 overall. That's nothing to get somebody who we were talking about as a potential second, third round pick last year.
And here's the thing about, James Conner in general, right? Like we've talked about the fact that he has not been perfectly healthy throughout his career. 2024, very surprisingly, age 29 season actually yielded a career high 16 games played for James Conner. James Conner was relatively healthy. He did deal with an ankle injury at one point in the 2024 season, but that was his healthiest season to date. I don't think that, again, making the presumption that another year older, we're probably going to see some sort of, I'm not rooting for an injury, obviously, but
no, we love James
would I
Conner.
be surprised if James Conner dealt with more injuries in 2025 than 2024? No, I would not.
Yeah. And I'm going to stick with the same philosophy of getting a a year 2 running back that was drafted on day 2 that's stuck behind a clear starter. And to me, that's Blake Corum, who right now is RB 50, 148 overall. The Rams just use Kyren Williams up like, I mean, I can't even come up with a good metaphor or analogy here, right? Like they use him like crazy. He's going into the final year of his contract. It's not like Kyren Williams is this big 6 foot, 225-pound running back. Kyren is 5'9", 195, and they've been putting a bunch of miles on him. And I think Blake Corum's best NFL comparison is Kyren Williams. And we've seen how productive this backfield can be for running backs. And we know that once Sean McVay falls in love with the running back, they're going to get all the work. You can stash Blake Corum at the bottom of your roster right now, give up a 3rd round pick for him, maybe a player that you just, one of those dynasty cloggers, and just sit back and wait, because eventually Blake Corum is going to become the starter with the Rams eventually. And when he does, I think RB2 numbers at worst are what's in store for him at worst.
At worst. And I do want to say for Kyren Williams, a player that, again, has held top 10 dynasty value. There was a moment last year where we kind of had that scare. Okay, they invested 3rd round draft capital in Blake Corum. What does that mean for Kyren Williams? And then it didn't mean anything. But I do think what is significant is the fact that, there was a slight regression in terms of yards per game, where there wasn't an improvement here in rush yards per game, where there wasn't an improvement year over year, despite an increase in touchdowns, an increase in receiving or an increase in total scrimmage yards. There are concerns about fumbling, and it feels kind of minuscule when we're talking about what does fumbling mean for a player's dynasty value, but that fumbling, it probably is going to take its toll time over time. Your coaches will feel a little less comfortable. What is the number one job of a running back? Hold the football. Yep. Do not lose the football. And I do think that as much as the Rams like Kyren Williams, as much as they love what kind of upside he brings in the run game, if fumbling continues to be a problem, I could see them just giving Blake Corum more opportunities for the sake of seeing what they have.
A couple dynasty trades that I wanted to mention for you, to you right now. These are all within the last month. We talked about Jonathan Brooks on yesterday's show, but we had to trade Blake Corum for Jonathan Brooks straight up. Give me Blake Corum all day, because Absolutely. One of these guys is actually going to play this year.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Easy.
Blake Corum for pick 312.
Blake Corum.
Yeah. Blake Corum. Now, this is a super flex league, so keep that in mind. Blake Corum for Daniel Jones straight up.
Blake Corum.
I think right now is the time to buy Blake Corum. Again, you stash him at the bottom of your roster. If and when he gets his chance, he will. This is one of the best offenses in the league that produces the most fantasy points for their running backs. Go get Blake Corum now while he's discounted, because the moment he plays, Kate, and the moment Kyren Williams even goes down with a twisted ankle for 2 weeks, you're going to see Blake Corum's dynasty value rise from RB 50 all the way up inside, RB 30, maybe even as high as RB 20.
Fair.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about some receivers that we are trying to buy at our Dynasty League. And I see on our little show sheet here, it's Colts wide receivers. Let's talk about the receivers that we are stashing from the Indianapolis Colts next. This episode is brought to you by Nissan. The Armada Player of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, we're taking a look at some draft prospects to pick one player that stands out and the guy that we believe showcases the strength and power needed to push their team forward as we look into next season. This week's Nissan Armada and clear-cut Player of the Week is Luther Burden III from Missouri. Listen, I think he can do everything. I think he's the best receiver in this class. And when it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer. And that's exactly what I think Luther Burden did at Missouri. And I think that's what he's going to do at the next level. It's clear that our Player of the Week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada or any of their outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We're talking about 6 players that we are trying to stash at the bottom of our Dynasty rosters who have insane upside. And Kate, I want to talk about some Colts receivers. Who do you have?
I'm rolling with Josh Downs, who I think has a ton of upside here. Former 3rd-round pick out of the 2023 draft class. He's a smaller, undersized receiver, primarily plays out of the slot, doesn't get a ton of snaps out wide. But he's one of these guys that I'm looking at, and I'm considering his value, and I'm saying, all right, Josh Downs profiles as kind of this chain mover who, can make plays, and wide receiver 44, really? Like, we are looking at a receiver that among the 88 wide receivers with 50 or more targets in 2024 ranked 18th in yards per route run, a metric we know is very sticky because it tells you how productive are you when you are running routes. And he wasn't always running routes because he wasn't always fully healthy. That is a knock, I'm going to say. 18th in yards after the catch per reception, 11th in PFF receiving grade. I think in general, Josh Downs, his season is one to kind of forget. His first 2 seasons, ones to forget. But I think he's got a really unique physical skill set that's going to lend itself to getting open. I think it's going to lend itself to positive things once they figure out what in the world they are doing at quarterback.
So my guy is A.D. Mitchell. So let's compare and contrast these.
Could not find 2 more different
I know.
type of football players.
What's the goal here, Kate? The goal here is to find upside, right? And if they hit, or even if they reach like 85, 90% of their ceiling, could be a difference maker for you in dynasty leagues. And this is where I think I disagree with Josh Downs. I think he is a better receiver right now than A.D. Mitchell. And I think the odds of Downs becoming just a better player throughout the course of their career is higher. So that part, I agree with you. I just think Mitchell's ceiling is so much higher. We know that the Colts thought that A.D. Mitchell was the 4th best receiver in the class. We had some audio from Chris Ballard saying that they spent a 2nd-round pick on him, picked 52 overall, 6'4", 196, ran in the 4.3s. If he were to hit, you're talking about a guy that has potential wide receiver 1 upside. And whereas Downs, I think Downs is more of a slot receiver, a Z receiver, who is a really nice player. But if I'm taking a shot on one of these guys, give me the guy, first of all, that's cheaper, who is A.D. Mitchell, and the guy that has the higher ceiling, which again is A.D. Mitchell.
I think that's fair. I'm chasing more the floor because I think Josh Downs, over the course of his NFL career, is going to have the better career. Just point blank. I think he's going to have
the thing is, though, what does that look like? Because, like, is Downs somebody that's going to average like 800 yards a season? Because I think that's probably the case. But I think there is an outside chance that Mitchell's the guy that's our 1,200-yard receiver with 8 touchdowns a year.
I don't know. Because we saw 800 receiving yards, 5 touchdowns here in what we consider to be a big bummer of a season, right? I think if you're looking at upside and you want to chase A.D. Mitchell, that's fine. You are looking at a absolute physical specimen, just over 6'2", 205 pounds, 89th percentile in terms of 40-yard dash, vertical jump, and broad jump. Like, this dude's a freak. It's just, is he a good wide receiver? I don't know. So I think, yes, the cost comparison when I'm looking at A.D. Mitchell is much less than what I'm going to have to spend on a Josh Downs. But I also think the chance of Josh Downs hitting is just tremendously more significant than the chance of an 80.
Oh, I agree.
And again, maybe like, if you're not looking, I'm looking for a guy that I would love to have Josh Downs in my lineup. I can just kind of leave him, as like my wide receiver.
But I think that's the difference. I'm not looking for somebody that I need as a flex play. I want somebody that can be a difference maker when it's time to insert them into the lineup.
Is that the vibes you're getting from A.D. Mitchell?
No, but here's the thing with Mitchell for me. I think you're going to know by the end of year 2 whether to keep him or cut him. And I actually think having that kind of clarity is really nice, right? Like if he doesn't do anything this year and he's stuck behind Pierce and Downs and Pittman, you move on and it's whatever. But if he hits, you're talking about something completely different. I want to tell you some trades really quickly for A.D. Mitchell that are happening right now. A.D. Mitchell for pick 312. Imagine some of the receivers that are going to be available at pick 312 in this year's draft. They're going to be guys that are selected on day 3, right? Like it's going to be some really bad players going in that range. I would just much rather have A.D. Mitchell, who was an absolutely stacked receiver class last year and still went in the second round.
I mean, yeah, I think that's fair. I think what my hang up with A.D. Mitchell is that, like, I think he's much more of like an Alec Pierce type of skill set than a Josh Downs skill set, right? But Josh Downs, Alec Pierce, I think, again, bigger. I think they're going to play a similar type of role in this respective offense. I guess just give me Alec Pierce. And I don't know what my gripe is with A.D. Mitchell at this point. I just saw nothing that appeared overly special. And I think, coming out, I saw this big athlete who has a ton of upside, but didn't always play to that upside at Texas, didn't always play to what you perceived should be his level of play strength. And I'm going to be honest, watching him as a rookie, none of that changed for me. So
he did get open a lot, though. That's the thing that's hard is like I saw several times he would get open and then Anthony Richardson would just airmail him a pass by.
I mean, and that was
yards.
that's a hard part of the evaluation too, is the quarterback play, because
Yeah.
almost no team had a worse accuracy rate on pass attempts last year than the Indianapolis Colts as a whole. Like, this was not a good situation for A.D. Mitchell. So year 2 will probably be a significant one. But honestly, I think this is one of those teams that I, generally speaking, believe in the organization. I think they do need to figure out the quarterback position, but there's, I think, some general upside in this offense that at the prices, like, you could probably talk me into any of these Colts wide receivers, and
You'd probably get them all, but the problem is you don't. I think you
I
need
don't
to
think
have
you want them all, but
No. Because they're not all going to break out. I understand of like throwing darts and
mm-hmm.
hoping that one of these guys breaks out. It's a little bit like the Green Bay situation where they have so many, you kind of have to put your chips on one. For me, I'm just putting my chips on the cheapest one and the most athletic, which is A.D. Mitchell.
Yep, fair.
We should mention the price of these receivers: A.D. Mitchell, wide receiver 72, Alec Pierce, wide receiver 67. Your guys, Josh Downs, who you absolutely love, wide receiver 44. By the way, the age, Downs is 23, Pierce is 24, Mitchell is 23. They're all incredibly young. And this is kind of the problem when you have too many young receivers on your offense at one time. It's really hard to develop all those guys. I've been of the belief that I think one of them gets traded at some point this offseason. I don't think it's Mitchell. I think it comes down Downs or Pierce, but I'm not sure which one gets dealt.
TBD.
All right, Kate, let's talk about some tight ends that we want to stash on our dynasty rosters this offseason. We will get to that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft Show with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day, and find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. All right, Kate, let's talk about the tight ends, because of the 4 positions, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end is the one spot where it's very uncommon for a player to come out of nowhere and crack the top 5, top 6 tight ends. But who are you betting on here? Because it's not impossible. We've seen it happen before. Who are you placing your chips on?
I'm going to go ahead and take a swing and maybe a miss on former Texas prospect, now Carolina Panther tight end, Jatavian Sanders, who, again, rookie season, kind of one to forget about, especially when you're comparing it to, the generational talent that is Brock Bowers, who just came out and smashed some rookie records and was one of just the best pure receivers in the 2024 season, regardless of what position you're looking at here. JT Sanders, year one, 33 receptions, 342 receiving yards, and 1 touchdown, but is in an offense that I think has made some strides, right? We saw Brock Bowers in the second half of his 2024 campaign start to put some pieces together that made it look like, okay, he might be an NFL passer. He might be able to support some receiving assets in that group. Jatavian Sanders is a guy that I think is a good enough athlete that's going to check a lot of boxes and has some untapped potential as a receiver. And I really think you're just kind of getting in on the ground floor in terms of his evaluation. Right now on Dynasty League football, tight end 31. He's only 22 years old. He's kind of undersized too. So like not necessarily a guy that I think you're going to, have throw out there and, true pass rush sets to, block some chip defenders. Like you're not, I don't think he's going to be that kind of guy, but
That's why they
he
signed Tommy Tremble. Yep.
Yeah. He might be a serviceable receiver though. And I just think the room in Carolina is so wide open for playmakers to put their stamp on the offense.
Yeah, and there's not a clear-cut wide receiver one. I saw Dave Canales on Wednesday, I believe, say we think Xavier Leggett's our number one. Spoiler, he's not. I mean, if Xavier Leggett's your number one receiver, you don't have a number one receiver. So there is a lot of opportunity for someone to rise up. And I think JT Sanders, who was really productive at Texas, despite playing with a lot of different NFL receivers, including Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell, played with Jonathan Brooks, Bijan Robinson was there, stood out. So I do think he profiles as somebody that could become a impactful tight end. It's just, is Bryce Young that quarterback to kind of get him there? I don't know. But at least from what we saw over the last 5-6 games of the season, it seems like Bryce Young is going to at least be a competent passer moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. And again, final 2 seasons at Texas, he didn't do anything as a true freshman, but just under 1,300 receiving yards, 7 touchdowns over those 2 seasons. And again, you mentioned the NFL talent that he played around in that Texas offense. There were a lot of different playmakers. So to have that kind of impact, to, post, 613 receiving yards, 5 touchdowns in your second season, I'm not going to scoff at that. That's some solid production. 4th round draft capital. You're not going to be super excited about that, but I like the player. I like the fact that he was productive. I like his athletic profile enough that I think I'll take the shot, because I do think, maybe those questions about Bryce Young, whatever you have, those are well baked into the price, I think, at this point.
Yeah. My guy is Jake Ferguson, and call me a homer. I get it. But this is situation based, because we've seen whenever Dak Prescott's healthy, he really relies on the tight end, especially when you get near the red zone. And Jake Ferguson was one of his favorite targets. I go back to the playoff game in 2023, where Jake Ferguson had over 100 yards, I think 3 touchdowns in that game. But here's one of the reasons, Kate, that I'm really started to consider buying Jake Ferguson, is that Stephen Jones, who's basically the Cowboys GM, spoke at the owners meeting about wanting to get a contract extension done with Jake Ferguson. And I think that's really interesting, right? Like, if they are willing to commit more money to Ferguson, they obviously believe that he can be a long-term solution there. And if you're pairing him with Dak Prescott for the next 3-4 years, that's just going to be really intriguing for me. And we've seen Ferguson be a top 10 fantasy tight end before during the 2023 season. He's only 26. I think you could do worse than Ferguson. Now, he doesn't give you the upside of some of the top names, but could he absolutely outproduce Mark Andrews, David Njoku, Dalton Kincaid, Kyle Pitts this year? Absolutely. And it only cost me pick 150 in my startup draft. So I'm doing that in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I love this pick. And we've been big fans of Jake Ferguson in terms of his dynasty value for a while now. I feel like we were on Jake Ferguson pretty early, and I still think the value stands. Unfortunately, didn't have that excellent trajectory, didn't continue to build on his previous seasons there in 2024. But there were so many different factors that I think led to that. I don't think you can discount the fact that like Dak Prescott was not there. Jake Ferguson missed time himself.
Yeah, to say he got hurt in week 1 with an injury that a lot of Cowboy fans thought was going to be a season-ending knee injury. He came back way earlier than what he should have, played through it. It hurt his overall numbers, but he just was never healthy all year long. And one of the other things we should mention, Kate, is the Cowboys drafted Luke Schoonmaker in the 2nd round of the 2023 draft. And there was some concerns that maybe Schoonmaker was going to overtake Ferguson. Wasn't the case at all. Even, in year 2, we saw Scooney's snaps go down, which kind of tells you where the Cowboys think he is at in his development. I think Jake Ferguson at tight end 17 is a massive steal.
I love the value there. And again, maybe you're not going to get that top 5 upside, but I do think what you're going to do is if you're kind of saying, I'm going to step back at the tight end position, I'm not going to chase an elite tight end like a Brock Bowers. I'm not going to chase one of these top 10 tight ends or top 5 tight ends. It's going to be, let's be honest. It's hard to trade for tight ends because it's a really difficult position to find stability at. I do think if you're going to punt tight end a little bit, Jake Ferguson is probably a guy that, maybe for the next 3 seasons, you can just kind of set him and forget him. As long as Dak Prescott is healthy and in the lineup, and he's presumably healthier in 2025. He's a guy that I think, okay, so I'm going to, maybe prioritize some other positions when I'm looking to fill up my roster. And I'm just going to set Jake Ferguson into my lineup, and then he's going to sit there, and then I'll move him out when it's the Cowboys bye week, and then I'm just going to plug him back in.
And I think we said on Wednesday's show that like Pat Freiermuth and Dallas Goedert are tight ends that you could move on from. We call them dynasty cloggers. I think Ferguson's a little bit different because he's younger than both of those players. And the Cowboys are they pass a lot more than what Pittsburgh and Philadelphia do. So you can just have more volume in this offense. And the other thing we should mention, Kate, is like this is a team that moved on from Brandon Cooks this offseason. They don't have that number 2 target in the passing offense yet. And even if they draft a receiver at 12, Ferguson is still going to get a heavy, heavy workload. There's just only a handful of tight ends in fantasy that are the de facto number 2 option in the passing game. Jake Ferguson's one of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, that is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube, download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. Enjoy your weekend. We'll be back on Monday with some more rookie profiles as we get really closer to the NFL draft.